Morning, folks. Today we're going to start our work with Maya Angelou's Why the Caged Bird Sings. So we're going to begin with the prologue. It's the little section that comes right before chapter 1 in the very beginning. There's no title for it. It doesn't say prologue or anything. It's just the little chapter that precedes chapter 1. So for the prologue, we're going to focus on standard RL 8.3, which is how to analyze lines of dialogue or incidents in a story to determine how they propel the action, reveal aspects of character, or provoke a decision. So our steps for this standard are basically going to be our annotation steps. It's a fiction text. We're going to treat it like a fiction text, although it's an autobiography because it has a narrative structure. So we are going to annotate for setting, main characters, conflict, resolution, and then get the theme for each chapter. So in an RL 8.3 scenario, so when we're dealing with those kinds of questions, they're typically dealing with cause and effect. So how does an incident in a story propel the action or reveal something about a character or provide the motivation for a decision? So these are cause and effect questions. So we need to know the setting, the main characters, the conflict, and the resolution, because those are the linear sort of progression of the story. So if you're asked a question, we need to figure out how does this moment in the story become a cause that produces an effect? And the effect might be, well, this moment tells us a cause that shows characterization, and the characterization would be the effect. Or it might be that this moment shows us a motivation, which is going to be the cause for a later decision, which would then be the effect that a character makes. Or it might be that this is the moment that is the cause that leads up to the conflict, or that shows us the conflict, or the moment that is the cause that leads up to the resolution. Or it might be that it's the effect that is related to a cause. So however way it works, whether we're looking specifically at the effect to understand the cause, or we're looking at the cause to understand the effect, RL 8.3 questions are always about cause and effect. So we need to make sure to annotate for that structure so we understand the parts of the story and how they break down, and then we can determine what comes before what, or what is the thing that produces what, the cause and the effect. So let's take a look at the very beginning of the prologue, and I'm going to model the first question for you, and then I'm going to cut you guys loose to continue to read the prologue independently and answer the rest of the questions independently. Okay, so let's read the beginning of the prologue together. What are you looking at me for? I didn't come to stay. I hadn't so much forgot as I couldn't bring myself to remember. Other things were more important. What are you looking at me for? I didn't come to stay. Whether I could remember the rest of the poem or not was immaterial. The truth of the statement was like a wadded up handkerchief, sopping wet in my fists, and the sooner they accepted it, the quicker I could let my hands open and the air would cool my palms. What are you looking at me for? The children's section of the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church was wiggling and giggling over my well-known forgetfulness. Okay, so let's just stop right here and begin to kind of make some sense of our annotation process. So the first thing I'm noticing is right here, the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church. That's our setting. So we know that we're in a church. And we know that we're dealing with the children's section, so we can tell that we're focused on children that are in the church. I also look right up here, and it says, I hadn't so much forgot as I couldn't bring myself to remember. So I know there's a first-person narrative. Later on in the story, we'll learn that that first person's name is Marguerite, which is going to be short for Maya. So right now we know our setting is the church. We know we're focused on this this first-person narrative, who's also called Marguerite later on, and that, Marguerite is a child at this point, and she's trying to remember a poem. She doesn't really think the poem is all that important because she says once she says it, she's able to move on to other important things, but she can't remember the poem. When we come over here, it says the children's section of the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church was wiggling and giggling over my well-known forgetfulness. So we have a conflict. The story begins with the narrator trying to recall a poem, assumably that she's supposed to recite during church, and she can't really remember it. She has other important things to focus on. So I'm not sure if it's really that she can't remember it or if, she doesn't really care to remember it. She's focused on other important things. She just kind of wants to get over with this part where she's supposed to quote the poem. And then finally we get to, the children are wiggling and giggling over her well-known forgetfulness. So, based upon this information, this isn't the first time that she's been asked to recite a poem in church that she's forgotten. And we know that she kind of forgets it. She has well-known forgetfulness, yeah, but she kind of forgets it because it's not really all that important to her. Okay, so we have our setting as the church. Our main character is the narrator, also known as Marguerite, who you'll find out later. And the conflict we have is that the children are kind of laughing and making fun of Marguerite. So now let's take a look at the one question that I'm going to model with you guys today, the one that matches on to RL 8.3. So the question is, how does Marguerite's inability to remember the poem in church mostly affect the story? So here again, it's a cause and effect question. So Marguerite's inability to remember, so she can't remember the poem, how does that affect the story? So we've got a cause and we've got an effect. The cause is she can't remember the poem, and so what's the effect of the story? So let's go back real quick and look at the text and try to answer it for ourselves before we answer the question and figure out what's been provided for us. So she's trying to remember the poem. She's not sure if it's that she's forgotten it or that she can't bring herself to remember because she has other important things that she wants to focus on. So that's a problem. And so what's the effect of the problem? Well, the effect is it causes the kids to wiggle and giggle over her well-known forgetfulness. So the cause is she can't remember, and the effect is it makes kids laugh at her and make fun of her. So now that we've kind of answered the question for ourselves, let's go back and see at what's provided in the options. So A says it shows how difficult it must have been for Maya Angelou to write an autobiography. Whoa, that's smart, but is it actually answering the question? No. The simple cause and effect answer that we had was she can't remember the poem, therefore the kids make fun of her. So this is like a deeper meaning. In these RL 8.3 questions, unless it asks specifically for a deeper meaning, all it's asking is how does one thing affect another thing? So it's interesting that the story begins with a child who's struggling to remember, and we know that this is Maya Angelou's autobiography. This is Maya Angelou as an old lady going back and trying to remember her childhood and recount her childhood. So it's a deeper meaning, kind of interesting that the story begins with the problem of remembering, but it does not specifically answer the question, so we know it can't be A. B says it characterizes Marguerite as forgetful. Well, that's true. The text, even if we look specifically at it, it mentions that she has well-known forgetfulness. So does that specifically characterize her as forgetful? I would say, a question mark next to that, but it's not how we answer the question. How does her inability to remember affect the story? So does it characterize her as forgetful? Yeah, it does. But we also said that it causes the kids to make fun of her. So we put a question mark next to B. Maybe, right? It's possibly, if it's the only best answer that we have, then that's what we're going to go with. So definitely a question mark next to it. It does characterize her as forgetful, but it's a complicated characterization because as we remember from the prologue, what we read of it is Marguerite's not really sure if she has trouble remembering the poem or if she just has more important things to focus on. So I'm not really comfortable with characterizing her as forgetful. It's more, to me, it seems like she just doesn't care about memorizing this poem for church. So C says it establishes a conflict because it causes the children in church to laugh at Marguerite. Well, yeah, that's what we said it was, right? So she can't remember, and the effect of that is the kids laugh at her, which is a conflict. Great. So C's looking like it's the best answer, and it's better than B. Let's just make sure that D doesn't have anything even better. D says it reveals that Marguerite's inability to remember the poem is connected to her unconscious desire to forget the church community altogether. wow, like D's a really smart answer, but to me, it's an answer on a deeper level. And because the question doesn't specifically ask about a deeper level, we're going to say that C is our best answer. A simple cause and effect. She can't remember the poem, and what's the effect of it? It's a conflict. The kids start to laugh and make fun of her. D says, it reveals Marguerite's inability to remember the poem is connected to her unconscious desire to forget the church community altogether. That's really smart. It says that she's not sure if it's that she can't remember or if it's just that she has other things that she wants to focus on. So it begins with this kind of proposition that maybe she isn't really forgetful. Maybe she just doesn't care about memorizing the poem to appease the church community. So maybe she really, maybe her forgetfulness is really connected to this kind of unconscious desire for her to not even be in the church. Maybe she doesn't even care about the poem and about the church. Maybe that's what it really is. Maybe she's not forgetful at all. So D is really smart, and it's a deeper meaning. A is really smart, and it's a deeper meaning. But the question's not asking about deeper meanings. It's just asking about how something affects the story, how her forgetfulness affects the story. And yeah, it characterizes her as forgetful, but we're not sure, is she really forgetful, or does she really just not care about the poem? That's why we said B wasn't the best answer, and C was the best answer. These RL 8.3 questions are typically straightforward about cause and effect unless they ask about a deeper meaning. So C is the best answer because it just obviously shows she forgets, and the result is kids make fun of her, which is a conflict for the story. So at this point, you guys are to do the rest of the reading of the prologue, which is really short and really rich and beautiful prologue. You're to do the rest of the reading independently. You're to continue along with your annotation process. So we've already got the setting as the church. We know our main character is Marguerite. We know one of the conflicts is that she's being made fun of by the children. So you're going to need to go ahead and track the text to see if we get more characterization of Marguerite, if we get further conflicts, what the resolution is, and finally what the theme or life lesson is of the prologue. After that, you have questions 2, 3, 4, and 5 to answer independently.